It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality. Joining us tonight is the ACA's very own Matt Dillahunty.
Hi.
And of course, for the first time in person, in real life, apparently not a hologram, we have the show's founder and creator, Dr. Darrel Ray. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on. This is cool. Actually, be on the show. I love it.
And first time in the new studio. So.
Yeah, right. I haven't been in this new studio.
Yeah, with the fancy digs. I mean, it's a good setup.
Yeah, it is. It is a good setup. I love it.
Yeah.
Good lighting.
So we are going to be diving into all things secular sexuality tonight. I mean, why secular sexuality? We've spent a lot of time this month talking about sort of why this show even exists. I mean, what's so important about all of it? And it's a good time to start asking that question to the man who actually made it exist, who made it happen, and set everything into motion. So we're going to be talking about recovery from religion. We're going to be talking about the Secular Therapy Project and about secular sexuality. So if you've ever watched this show, if you've ever stumbled across this show, if this is your first time stumbling across this show and you've thought to yourself, why do these assholes feel the need to drone on for an hour and a half? I would like to think that we've already established the answer for that, but we're going to give you something a little bit more concrete. So please feel free to give us a call. We're going to be at 512-686-0279. Again, that's 512-686-0279. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your questions. And with that, I'd like to dive in just a little bit and say, what is recovery from religion? I mean, what does that even mean, and why have you spent so much of your life building this up?
Well, I'm happy to say that this year, April of this year, was our 10th anniversary, celebrating our 10th anniversary of recovery from religion. And I started it in 2009 as a direct response to the need that came when I published The God Virus, my book, The God Virus. I got overwhelmed with phone calls and emails and texts. I need help. Well, who do I turn to? Your book, opened my eyes to stuff. So I started a single group there in Kansas City where I live, and 11 people showed up, and I gave like a week's notice, and 11 people showed up, and I only knew one person in the group.
All right.
The other 10 people sat there for 3 hours, and I just asked 2 questions. I said, how did religion help you? How did religion hurt you? And how does it help when you left religion? Mm-hmm. And 3 hours later, the restaurant manager was kicking us out of that room because they were closing the place down.
Yeah.
And I realized I've got a tiger by the tail. There is a real need for people to be able to dump this stuff and to talk about this stuff and get some strategies for dealing with the religious indoctrination that they got as children. So that's how it all got started. But I'm a psychologist by training, and I've been a psychologist pretty much my whole career, and I have a passion for helping people.
Sure.
And when I know if there's a small tool I can give you that'll make your life a hell of a lot happier, I want to give it to you. Mm-hmm. But I can't give it to 1 million people. And so how can we get this out to a lot of people? Just like the Atheist Experience is doing. You're getting this out to 1 million people, and you're giving them tools and ideas. Well, that's what we're trying to do, but we're trying to do it in a different spot on the spectrum, you will. We're trying to do it with people who've just left religion. Their emotions are still raw. Mm-hmm. They're trying to deal with families who have rejected them. They're trying to reestablish who they are as a sexual human being, and is it okay to masturbate? And yeah, it is.
Yes.
Among other things.
From the expert, from the doctor himself, yeah.
So that's what got this all started. And I'm just passionate about helping people. And the more I see people being helped by what we're doing, the more it empowers me and empowers our volunteers. I mean, we've got almost 100 volunteers literally doing something every single day. Mm-hmm. And most of those 100 volunteers are doing something every day to help other people. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, folks who have been watching this show regularly and recently will be familiar with this, but I mean, I myself, I mean, I remember growing up with my dad, and he would see like an atheist bumper sticker or something, and he would sort of ask like, why do atheists hang out? Why do they need a community? What do they get? What do? They just sit around and talk about how there's still not a God? You know, I mean, there's nobody to worship. There's nobody to like donate 10% of your income to. So I mean, what are you doing? And for me, I never really had an answer, but the more time I spend around the ACA, the more I realize the importance of that support. And even just today, I recognized, I had something pop up on social media saying, remember when? And like 4 years ago, I took the very, very, very mild action of changing my profile picture to my profile picture, but with a rainbow filter. And for me, in the world I grew up in, to do that felt like a radical act. I felt like I had a target on my back. I felt like that was huge. And now I laugh at how silly that is because after having sort of thrown off those shackles, I just feel so much more free. And if I were to go through, my Facebook feed or whatever from the past year, it's obviously much more provocative. I mean, the things I've said on this show, Lord, clearly I don't have the same friend group, but there is something to be said. I didn't even realize at the time how scary that felt. I mean, I knew that act felt scary, but I didn't realize how different my life could be. So recovery feels like the right word in a lot of ways.
It is. We just literally had a training session for our volunteers. We train all our volunteers a lot, and they get lots of good interactive therapy, or training rather, to learn how to take phone calls and take chats. But one of the things we really got in depth was, what's the emotions that goes through a chatter or a caller before they hit that button to chat with us, or before they hit the dial to dial us. And, the emotions are extremely powerful. Am I committing blasphemy by calling these people?
Yeah.
Is this group going to convert me or deconvert me? Those are all questions. And are these people going to judge me for being whatever? And all the answer is no to all those questions. We don't do any of that stuff. We just listen to you. We try to be good peer support. We're not therapists. I mean, I'm a therapist, but our volunteers are not therapists. And they're not there to be therapists. They're there to answer questions and listen, and most of all, provide resources for people. So if you'd have called us 4 years ago, should I put that rainbow filter up or not? We'd have said, probably, what do you think? How do you feel about it?
Yeah.
What are the consequences
what
of
does
doing
it mean?
that? We would have helped you think through the process. And when you're finished, you would have hit the button harder. I'm putting a stronger filter up there, or whatever you decided to do.
Well, I mean, we have folks who call into this show hiding in the basement.
I know, or a closet.
And there are folks who watch this show, I'm sure, on their cell phones in the bathroom because they're, still living at home, or they have a partner who, religion is a family affair in so many ways. I mean, that's how so many people come to it to begin with, but it's also how people stay stuck. And so I'm very curious about the types of callers y'all get at Recovery from Religion, whether it is, mostly folks who are just like, yeah, great job, of course I agree, or if it's people calling in to say, like, God is going to judge you, or if it is those sort of like hidden in the closet, bathroom calling kind of folks.
Almost all of them are the bathroom calling kind of folks.
Yeah.
But almost all of them are. I was telling Matt earlier
You can use
today.
that slogan, by the way. That's free. That's yours. Just go ahead and put that on the website right now.
The bathroom calling folks.
It's the privacy room. It's where if you were, like masturbation was frowned on, you went you did it in the shower, you did it in the bathroom, whatever else. So of course they're going to call from there.
When I was in like junior high, my parents referred to it as my office for that very reason. Only as an adult do I start to realize the implications that I wasn't fooling anybody. But nevertheless, so
you were working it.
Right, yeah.
It's an office.
I eventually developed some more sophisticated methods. But anyhow, so it is a lot of folks who are, I don't want to say on the edge, but maybe they're still in that should I, shouldn't I kind of place.
Well, they are, and they're asking questions. They probably saw the atheist experience.
Yeah.
And we get more from you guys, from these...
From ACA shows in general.
ACA shows in general. than all other sources put together. Now we've got some, like Seth Andrews sends us quite a few, but still.
Screw that guy.
Yeah, I know. But relative to you guys, it's still, you really send us a lot of people, and they're looking for answers, and our resource pages are filled with all sorts. You name the problem, we've heard it a million times.
Sure.
And so we've developed resources to be able to help people. But more interestingly, and I think most people don't know what's about this part about us in Recovery from Religion is we're international. We had a day, I believe it was last Thursday. Today's Thursday. No, it was last Tuesday. I'm sorry. The whole day, we didn't get a single chat from within the United States.
Oh, wow.
Every chat came from Perth, Australia, or New Zealand, or Mumbai, India, or Syria. We got a chat from Syria, which those are dangerous.
I mean, that's intimidating. The simple act of calling you could have life-ending consequences.
Exactly. We got another chat came in from Norway. Now we think, well, Norway's a nice liberal atheist. Now this person had been raised in a Pentecostal bubble in Norway, of all places. You don't think of that, but everywhere you look on this planet, there's some kind of religious infection going on. And
having done a lot of work with the National Suicide Prevention Line and the local mental health authorities crisis line, I find that so intimidating to think about answering questions on a global level, to be able to find those resources, to be able to have that database of what's available.
Yeah.
That's huge to me.
Well, and unfortunately, we're almost all English-based. We do have some Spanish-based stuff, and we're developing that, but we can't possibly be in all languages. But really to try to do that. But back to what your original question was, they're calling in for a wide variety of reasons, but I'm going to say, based upon what we're talking about here on this show, upwards to 50% of the people, even if it's their first chat, first time they've ever talked to anybody, within that first chat or phone call, they're going to tell us about their sexuality. Sexuality, I think, and it's been my contention, I know you've read my book, Sex and God, that sex is the weak spot in almost all patriarchal religions. So people are calling us and they're proving to me that that's right over and over again, because they say I'm afraid of my sexuality, or my parents beat me for masturbating, or I had sex before I got married and I feel so guilty about it, but now I don't want to be there anymore, because religion uses sex against us, of course, and I would say upwards to 50% of all the chatters and callers are dealing with that in some ways. And a hell of a lot of LGBTQ people. We get a ton of that. In fact, we have a whole community within our groups. We have a behind-the-scenes community that people can come to, and we've got a lot of LGBT people talking to each other about what it's like to come out as all sorts of things.
Have you thought about calling it the back door?
No, I haven't tried that yet. No, we haven't thought about that. You want to join us, and you can become our naming clone.
We can only develop so many slogans in one show, Matt. Come on. I feel like we've already accomplished that.
Everything should be a double entendre. I can appreciate the fact that you're starting to get calls from outside the United States. I remember when we were doing Atheist Experience on public access, and every call was from Austin when we first started, because it's local. And then as soon as it started streaming, there started to be fewer calls from Austin, and then there were fewer calls from the United States. And I'm pretty confident that fairly early on there was a show where nobody called from the United States at all.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, this is something. So it's nice that's happening, especially it's a little frustrating that we're still, and me too, English only.
Right.
I'm an idiot. I just never put in the effort to learn other languages.
I've spent the hours on Duolingo. It is not my expertise, but I plug away at it.
I'd like to get to a point where we, obviously the voice-to-text stuff's getting better so that you can get subtitles, but I've really been pushing to make sure we have like ASL interpreters at, events. And it's not cheap, but fortunately I've got a couple of friends, and it's a community that the hearing impaired community is one that I think we can do a much better job reaching out to.
Well, I mean, in Austin in particular, I recognize that we are increasingly a global platform. But I mean, there's a huge deaf and hard of hearing community here in Austin. The Texas School of the Deaf is here, and there's a very real need. So it's an important thing that I'm glad we're working towards.
Right.
So with that, we've got a couple of folks on the line, so I want to go ahead and jump on this first call and talk to Stefan. Stefan, you are now on the air. What's going on tonight?
Holy crap, hi.
Hey, what can we do for you?
Hi. Well, I heard you guys talking about how everybody started in religion and recovering from religion. My backstory, I was a Christian, like Jehovah's Witness, unfortunately, first, and then a Free Will Baptist or whatever the hell my mom was. And it wasn't until I met my ex-fiance, Ashley, that she made me actually start to question everything. And it wasn't until I think about a little over a year ago that I actually started questioning things and thinking, well, this isn't right. And then actually I started watching the Atheist Experience, especially with you, Matt, you, Mr. Dillahunty, and it was like a super huge eye opener. And the more I watched, the more I kind of figured, so my questions are correct. And my current fiance right now, she is an agnostic theist, and the one part that she's having trouble with is the whole, how can everything be without a God? How can everything have been created by a God? And trying to explain to her, well, it's evolution, it's cells reproducing, and just trying to remember all the basic biology, which I sucked at biology. But yeah, recovering from all that crap. It's just, there are a lot of times whenever I still question, like, oh shit, what if there is one? But then I have to remind myself, okay, well, if there is one, then all this crap that I've been saying, because I've gotten into debates with a couple of a lot of my family members, and I've talked shit on quote unquote God. I've questioned them. It's like, okay, if there was really a God, then wouldn't he be stopping me? Wouldn't he been doing this? And then
you're blaspheming. I mean, you're really asking for it. You know? Exactly.
I mean, I've called this imaginary friend that they have in the sky every fucking name I can think of in the book, and yet nothing happens. And it's like, okay, if your God is really real and he doesn't like that kind of stuff, then why hasn't he done anything to hurt me? Why hasn't he done anything to stop me? What the hell is going on? I mean, again, either he's that fucking weak, or just something else. And it's hard to demonstrate that to other people. And then whenever they ask these questions, like I had a debate with my own dad about it, and there were a couple things that came up that I unfortunately could not remember how to get through. And again, there are times whenever I'm at work and I'm listening to the Atheist Experience, like past episodes, and it's like, okay, I can remember this, but then again, there's this question, trying to be as skeptical as possible, but then again, we don't freaking know. And the possibility of ever being able to know whether or not there's actually a true God, I don't feel like that's even possible to figure out, even though I'm pretty sure there's not one. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Well, in the context of this show, God can't give evidence that he exists, because then you'd know he exists. And when you catch a peeping Tom, it's really hard for them to keep peeping.
Right? Yeah. I mean, from everything you're saying, it to me sounds sort of like that Dillahunty gumball question. You know, it's this idea of, as skeptics, I can't categorically prove that there is no God. But there's no reason to believe that there is one. And I can say from personal experience and seeing so many other people's, how much easier life can be when you disabuse yourself of the notion that this is the God, that this, construct that was created some 2,000-3,000 years ago is the only God and who you should be obeying and reading about and learning from. And the proof is in the pudding in a lot of ways. If that God was real, man, he's an asshole in so many ways, because if you're following those instructions, following those rules, it's pretty miserable.
Devin, if I could ask, and plead the fifth if you want, I don't want to push this, what kind of sexuality was pushed on you by your religious training and background?
Well, it wasn't... My background isn't exactly... I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean... It's funny because my mom, whenever I first told my mom that, hey, I was ready to lose my virginity, she was the one that bawled her eyes out, like, oh my God, my baby's doing this and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of thought, okay, whatever. But my dad, on the other hand, he, I'll never forget these words. He said, don't fall in love with the first pussy that you find, which now that I think about it, I like, wow, way to put it. But
it's a lot to unpack there.
That was...
Well, Jehovah's Witnesses can be pretty difficult when it comes to sexuality. So you mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses. I was kind of wondering are you familiar with some of the ex-Jehovah's Witness resources that we have on our website, recoverfromreligion.org?
No, unfortunately I have not been able to.
Well, would you consider yourself an ex-Jehovah's Witness or not?
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Well, you do make some interesting points, in this notion of, well, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not, I can't know, whatever else. But it is a curious thing that if there is a God, I didn't choose, and have never chosen, any aspect of my sexuality. I'm attracted to what I'm attracted to for reasons that are beyond my comprehension. And so if there's a God that really has rules against whatever the hell I might be into, you're right. Why hasn't he acted? And if either there is no God or he doesn't care or he's peeping, and for somebody who's really convinced, I'll just go with God watches you masturbate and evidently isn't too bothered by it. He hasn't done anything. Didn't make hair grow on my palm or anything.
Nobody's gone blind. Yeah.
Yep.
I just wear glasses, but I notice you do too.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going blind, but it's for unrelated reasons.
Right. And it's one of those things, like I said, because my dad, my stepmom, my stepdad, and my actual biological mother, they're all religious. One side more religious than the other, and of course, my dad, he's got a big problem with the whole transsexual group, the transgenders and all that, and he made the statement once that, now that they're doing this, they just want to get into the bathroom. They want to get into, the opposite sex bathroom. And he said, if I'm correct on this quote, he said, I don't want a woman who used to be a man going into the same bathroom with my daughter. And I thought, okay, I was thinking about that today, and I thought, okay, I'm sorry, but I don't know any transgenders really at all, any transgender people or transsexual people, but I'm pretty damn sure that maybe there are some that think like that, but as many as far as I can tell, there aren't any that would do that because they have a better moral compass than that. And I feel like the biggest reason why my dad is saying that is just because, of course, his little holy book says, oh, well, transgenders, anybody who's gay or blah, 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 blah.
Male and female, he created
it's worse than that.
All of that.
It is, he's unable to see things from any perspective other than his own experience. Mm-hmm. And so if he views trans women as if they're men secretly pretending, then he has to put it in that context in his head and say, if I was secretly pretending, what would my motivation be and what would I be doing? And so he's projecting all of the things that he's afraid he might do onto people who have no interest in doing it. They just want to go in and pee.
And you have to realize that if there was an incident of a trans woman going into a public restroom and assaulting a young girl, that it would be all over the news constantly.
You mean like priests?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
Look, anybody can be an asshole. I'm not saying that any particular group is full of assholes. I'm just saying that an asshole can come from anywhere. So by that definition, I'm confident that there are trans folks that are just miserable to be around. However, there are constantly trans women being attacked, brutalized. We've had
even murdered.
4 different trans women murdered in the city of Dallas this year in the last 6 months. We're midway through June. People in that population are incredibly vulnerable and constantly victimized, and we're barely talking about it. And yet, if there was a single incident like the hypothetical that your dad is describing, you better believe it would be on the front page of every news site over and over and over again. I mean, Sean Hannity would not let us forget that it happened. So it's not happening, at least not in any kind of statistically significant, meaningful way. I mean, one person being assaulted is a problem. One person assaulted is way too many, but there's just no validity to that claim. There's no data. There's no reason to think that that's happening.
Yeah, and actually, just the other day, there's a Facebook forum that I was loosely associated with, and it will be again. And there was a post where someone basically said that they were complaining about kids at pride festivals, and I was like, if they're too young to understand, then they don't understand, and if they're old enough to understand, then they understand. And so, you know, it's not like people were actually having sex or whatever else. Plus,
well, and it's presumptive of the idea that pride or being gay or having a gay identity is sexual in nature.
Well, if there's a dude in a thong and nothing else, they were like, oh my gosh, how can you have that in front of kids? And I'm like, you don't think kids see their parents walk around in their underwear and stuff like that on occasion? But what they did was the original poster created this incredibly, just plucked it right out of his ass connection between the LGBT community and pedophilia, and used this as a sensational thing. And he was like, well, it's just logical that, you know, this would lead to pedophilia. And I was like, and an apologist friend of mine jumped in to claim that, you know, it was reasonable to suggest that there was a connection between pedophilia and I was like, I don't have time to give you guys a lecture right now, but if this is the kind of stuff, the kind of outrageous slander that's going to happen on this page, I'm leaving. And I left. The post got taken down. But what I would have written, if there had been time and interest, is that, first of all, pedophilia is not the problem, because that's about what you're attracted to, and you didn't choose that. There are plenty of pedophiles who never act on it because they have a moral compass that, you know, permits them to do that. It doesn't change whether or not they're attracted to it. The problem is pederasty. The problem is child rape. The problem is all of these things. And where is it happening? It's not happening in the LGBTQ community, according to any data I've seen, at any rate greater than it is anywhere else. As Christy was saying, anybody can be an asshole, and anybody can be an abuser, and anybody, you know, you have no idea or no way of knowing that because somebody has this kink or this preference or whatever else, that they're, you know, you view that as deviant, and so you apply all these other things on them that are deviant as well. And that's just not the case. And so I'd like to see everybody start talking about the difference between pedophilia, what you're attracted to, and then the actions you take on behalf of it, making that distinction.
Right. And I hope this doesn't come off as biased or anything, but to add on a little bit with what you just said, I feel like a lot of times whenever people make that assumption, it's like, I feel like they're going mostly off their book. Like the people that I've heard in general are going off their holy book. Like the transgender community, the transsexual community, that they're going basically off their book. And it's just like my stepmother said her cousin apparently was dying of AIDS or something like that. And her cousin happened to be gay. And I thought, okay, is that completely true? Or are you just saying that because you're religious and because of all this bullshit that has been said? You can't go off of that. You can't go off of the book. You know, I mean, these people haven't done anything wrong. And it's like, I think I talked about, either last week or the week before with that community. Stop. There's no use going after them. They're not doing anything wrong. They just want to be happy. They're not going after other people like I feel religion does. They're not going after other people. They're just trying to get the same rights that everybody else has. And everybody, there are a lot of people that, come after them and say, no, this isn't right because it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It's like, you know what? No, fuck you. No, this is not how it's supposed to go. They're not doing anything wrong to you. They, like you said, they can't help who they're attracted to. And as long as you teach your kids, these guys, as long as they're not hurting anybody, they're fine. These people that are coming out as gay, lesbian, or anything, they're not hurting anybody. They can't help who they're attracted to, and there's nothing wrong with it. So, you don't have to be afraid of them. And with all these other people, just leave them the fuck alone. It's that simple. people, but they can't get that through their thick head. And it annoys the holy shit out of me. And I've had countless family members who have done the exact same thing, getting onto that community and countless others. And it's just, delete you off of Facebook and all that. But I just, half the time I don't know how to convince them. I don't know how to tell them, what you're saying, it doesn't make any logical sense. And half the time, like I said, they're going off their own religious beliefs and I don't know what to do. So, but that's my predicament.
It's not based on morality so much as fear. And I do appreciate you calling in. I'd like to ask Darrel specifically a little bit more about just why the queer community in particular seems targeted by religion. And is it because coincidentally these books 2,000 years ago happened to include these phrases, or is there really more to it than that? So, Stefan, I do really appreciate you calling in. I'm going to go ahead and jump on some other calls and give Darrel a chance to answer that, if that's all right.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, and you guys are doing awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.
I don't know, the target, I think women have been targeted from very beginning of all the patriarchal religions, for sure. Excuse me a second.
I believe that. And that makes a certain kind of sense if we see religion as an opportunity to, I guess, just further these ideas of agriculture and passing lineage on. And now there's possession and there's all, the economy is growing up and we have to figure out a way to manage all of that, not to get, too heady into the evolution of human culture. But I think that that's a big part of it. It makes sense that subjugating women, I don't want to say necessary, but was a means to an end in just maintaining that economy.
Right. And so by extension, if you follow my logic a little bit here, women were targeted especially if they were not reproducing in the appropriate way. So with the appropriate person, because the lineage, like you mentioned, was important. So then you move that one step away, and people in the LGBTQ community are not reproducing in the appropriate way either. And they're not following the narrative that allows for the primogeniture of male dominance in the hierarchy. So they're violating one of the fundamental assumptions of all the major patriarchal religions.
And you can't have a patriarchy if you have these folks who don't need men or who don't need to pass on, to children.
But I want to point out the pattern is not just Christian, it's not just Muslim, it's not just Hindu. Hindu's very patriarchal. In fact, India is like the 159th most dangerous place on the planet for women, but also Buddhism. Buddhism's incredibly patriarchal, and it's also very abusive to children. If you just look at the number of children who are being virtually incarcerated for life inside of a monastery, mainly boys in certain parts of Thailand and Tibet. So to step outside of the narrative that makes for the male dominance is going to get you targeted among the patriarchal religions. So what I think is important that's happening right now, and I love it. I love what's happening, although we've got a ton of work to do, is that we're stepping away from the patriarchal narrative, and we're saying, in order to be a fully accepted member of our culture, you do not have to follow this narrative. You can follow your own narrative, and that's new, and it started. We could say it probably started most strongly at Stonewall. We're in Pride Month right now, so Stonewall would be a marker for that. Sure. But you could also go back and look in the convention of 1849 in New York, upstate New York, when women said we want the vote, and you start with Margaret Sanger and birth control and all those things. Those were all steps to move away from the patriarchy, very small ones, and we don't realize how scary. You talked about you putting a filter up. Imagine what Margaret Sanger had to do when she could get beat up and put in prison or killed, and some women were killed for just asking for the vote. So I think that's kind of my answer to your question. It's broader than just LGBTQ. I think we need to understand the context of how this culture tries to impose a male-dominated viewpoint.
Yeah, anything that threatens the idea that a child-producing man accumulates wealth and then gives that to his son. Anything that goes against that concept, whether it's birth control or women having their own their own resources, their own property, or just anybody who's not wanting to reproduce is threatening to that system.
And then there's another thing. I wrote an article. I actually have a YouTube video on this called "Male Shame," and I talk about our culture shames men for not behaving in a certain way, and it's a part of this whole male dominance narrative. If you don't behave in a certain way, you don't talk a certain way, if you don't engage in certain activities and hobbies, and you must not be fully man. And then we've got this whole list of pejorative terms that our culture. I learned them all when I was in 8th grade in gym class. And the boys will call each other all sorts of names because they caught a boy masturbating, or they caught a boy looking at another boy's penis, or you name it. There's all sorts of ways to try and it tries to force identity upon boys at very, very young age. And I think we suffer from this now because men in our culture are now feel like they've got to act in a certain way, and if a woman acts a certain way, it's a shame on the man. We've got this idea that men should control their women.
Yep.
It comes right out of Christianity, comes right out of Islam, comes right out of Judaism. If a man does not control his women, then he's less of a man, and he is shamed.
Again, he doesn't have his household in order. He can't pass on his line. It's all about that idea of lineage.
Exactly.
That's how you get to the honor killings and things like that. You've
Exactly.
shamed our family. No, you just did. The second you had that thought, uttered it, and then tried to take action against somebody else.
Yeah, right.
Well, I definitely want to ask a lot more about recovery from religion and the work that y'all do, but I did want to take one more call real quickly, so I'm going to jump on the line with Stan. Stan, you're on the air. What can we do for you tonight?
Hello, hi. Hello, Christy and Dr. Ray. Nice to meet you both. And Matt, I was previously able to talk to you on another show.
Oh,
and
great.
I'm glad to be able to talk to you again.
Well, welcome back.
Hi. So what I wanted to talk about, I read this article recently. I guess it was last. New York just recently passed a law banning the legal defense of gay panic and trans panic. And so for your viewers who may not know what that is, gay panic is when, a person, assaults or even kills, for instance, a gay man, because they think, well, that guy was coming on to me, so I had no choice. I didn't realize I had no choice but to hurt him, and trans panic may be when, man sees an attractive woman, goes up to her, realizes that she's trans, and then of course his sexuality is threatened, so he just has to murder her.
This idea that people could be so upset as to be legally insane, as to be irresponsible for their actions because they're so overwhelmed by somebody else's gender or sexuality. That they could commit murder and it wouldn't be their fault, because how could we possibly expect them to control themselves in that crazy idea? So New York State has said that this is not acceptable defense, that you can't murder somebody because you were so freaked out by their sexuality.
Yeah, it's one thing, when I heard this changed, I was happy. There's a Supreme Court ruling that actually kind of supports this, and that is the notion of fighting words, that there are words that you can say to someone that are just so offensive that no reasonable person could maintain control of their faculties, and so when they assault you or whatever else, they have a defense. And I have consistently maintained that is absolute bullshit. That what we're really doing is saying, this person's just so weak in character that uttering a phrase at them like "your mother's a whore" is enough for them to attack you.
Couldn't possibly be expected to maintain their composure in such a situation.
But a good chunk of people think this is a real thing, and it's a good thing, and it's still, Supreme Court precedent. I remember the debate that I did with Cy, where he was like, well, what if I said your wife was a whore, you'd want to punch me? And I was like, you just showed that you don't know me because, first of all, I wouldn't want to punch you. If my wife was a whore, then you're correct, and I wouldn't have any justification for being upset. And if she's not, then you're an idiot who clearly demonstrated he doesn't know my wife. So why would I punch you for that? I'll just let you sit here and keep making a fool of yourself.
Yeah, makes total sense.
If you think about this is actually, again, kind of moving with what we did earlier, an extension of another concept. From the 1780s, Blackstone, the legal book written by Blackstone on English common law, forgave men if they murdered their wife for adultery. And throughout the 1800s, it was acceptable. It was an accepted legal standard in almost every state in the United States.
Because it's so upsetting. How could you possibly be expected?
Well, even if your wife didn't commit adultery, if you suspected she committed adultery and you murdered her, you were still let off the hook with something far less or maybe not at all. As recently as the 1970s, it was still being used as a legal defense. This is not unlike what we're seeing with what New York just did. States systematically went through and said, no longer are we going to allow the perception of your wife committing adultery give you permission to murder her. We're not going to let that happen anymore. But that took 2 centuries to overcome that. And I hope we get this done a lot faster, but there's absolutely no excuse for one person's behavior to cause another person to murder him. I mean, short of self-defense, which by definition is not murder, of course, but this isn't self-defense.
Yeah, no, this is some lizard brain bullshit where people are essentially saying, I was just so mad it's justified.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not going to fly here.
Yeah, justifiable homicide. Not with those things.
So Stan, that's the kind of the context. Did you have a particular question in all of that?
Oh yeah. So it got me thinking, and especially it being Pride Month, I like these laws. So I believe the article said New York would be the 6th state to pass a similar law, and they listed out the states, like including California and a few other states, and they were blue states, and it got me thinking. How many times have we given people the advice, and I'm sure maybe one of you has said it as well, right? When you tell like young gay kids, if you're in a small town, and you're facing persecution, maybe you just have to get up and move to like a big city, right? Like your closest big city, and you'll find a community there that can accept you, right? But looking at just the way this country is going and the extreme cultural split between red states and blue states, right? States run by conservatives, states run by liberals. It seems like what is our next step to tell people that you have to move from one state to another? Because it's a fact at this point that simply put in blue states, you have more rights than you do in red states. Like we can look at the abortion laws that have been passed recently across the red states. There's such a big difference between these two areas. It's like, what hope can we offer people who are in these states and have no hope of moving? And I think it's honestly an unreasonable thing to be asking them to do so. What should we be telling them?
Yeah, I hear that. And the reality is, no matter how regressive the laws in Alabama, for instance, happen to be, there's still going to be queer people born there, no matter what they do to drive them out or to force them not to be there. There's still going to be women born there. Naturally, there's still going to be folks that are needing these types of protections. And I definitely hear what you're saying. I don't know that it's increasing. I'd love to hear y'all kind of weigh in on that. I mean, I know that certainly, there was a lot of folks who had to move north to get away from the slave-owning mindset of the South that, still hasn't entirely gone away, if we're being frank. But it's not the first time that folks have had to migrate in order to avoid persecution. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
I haven't seen statistics. on that. I have friends leaving the United States.
Sure.
For those reasons.
Every time I'm asked whether X is getting better or worse, I have a hard time coming up with an answer unless I've seen like real data, because what we know is a lot of people have this perception that the world in general is getting worse, but the data show otherwise.
Right, and that's very much my take on these things in general. When we zoom out far enough, when we look at, infant mortality or literacy or, any of these measures of, I guess, progress with a big P. But yeah, when we zoom in, it does get really dicey to try and understand or interpret the data.
Yeah. And the internet has kind of amplified things in the same way that the network news, well, if it bleeds, it leads, and so you think the world's worse. The other thing is that the internet makes it appear that somebody like, it serves as an equal footing for people. So when you see someone like Steven Anderson or one of the McMurtry, the possibly pumpkin loving, jackass calling for the death of the LGBTQ community, it's easy, especially if you are a member of that community, to think, oh my God, the world's going to hell. And then you realize these are tiny little churches that nobody would know about and nobody would pay any attention to if it weren't for the fact that they can put up just an average YouTube video. It didn't even have to be slick. That could potentially be seen by everybody. And that what's often happening is, like, you might look at some terrible or person that you view with terrible ideas and say, holy crap, this person's got 500,000 followers. Well, how many of those followers are you presuming are in agreement with them? Because quite often people will be followed and monitored. What if we found out that one of these hate groups that have, let's say, 100,000 followers actually only have 5,000 people who agree with them, and the other 95,000 people paying attention to this are ones that are like, oh, we're going to make sure that every time you say something, we're going to expose it and everything else.
And or bots.
Yeah.
Like Russian,
Russian
decisive.
It gives an impression that may not map to reality.
Right. So I am 45 miles from Westboro Baptist Church, and they are like the...
Irrelevant.
They're becoming irrelevant, that's for sure. But even in Kansas, after 50 years of watching them, I think they've lost influence. You just don't hear about them as much, of course, since Fred died. But they're still alive and well, and they're still picketing, but they just aren't getting the hits anymore, so to speak. Other people are kind of taking their place, unfortunately, I think.
Sure.
But I think you're right. The magnification, the amplification is the internet's what pushes a lot of this stuff.
Well, and there is a certain level of habituation, because when we look at TV even 10 years ago, I mean, this year, Seinfeld, for instance, is celebrating its 30th anniversary, and I grew up loving that show, and I still think it's hilarious, but man, has it not aged well. Yeah. There are so many moments that I watch now that are just so cringy in terms of the way they talk about gay folks, the way they talk about women in general. And we are just now used to the idea that you can have gay characters, fully well-developed gay characters on TV, that you can have women with agency. It doesn't have to be like Grace Under Fire, like the entire show is about how she's a single mom. She can just be a single mom and also have a show. So we get used to that, and we forget that that's actually progress. So I do tend to believe that when you zoom out far enough, things are tracking in the right direction in almost every way, in terms of representation.
Except for climate change and immigration and,
Yeah, in terms of equality in those senses. But there are certainly blips. There are definitely problems.
I kind of disagree with maybe with what you guys are saying, or maybe we're actually talking about two different things. I mean, I think that, like, you guys are just giving, are looking at this as in a general sense of, like, whether things are getting better or not, right? And what I feel I'm talking about are concrete steps to make people's lives more miserable, right? So, like, we can say that, like, the long arm, like the long arc of history, bends towards justice, right? That things are generally getting better. But we can actually point to right now actual laws that are being passed that are actually hurting people, right?
Yep.
And I'm saying that, like, in certain areas of this country, like, people simply have, like, more protections. You can just look at the books, you can compare, like, what's on the books between these two areas, and you can see that there's a stark difference, right? And I feel that difference is deepening, right? Like, this isn't like a general sense, like, something that can be amplified by social media. Like, these are real things.
Yeah, we're not saying everything's rosy, because when it comes to trans women in general, we started giving them equal rights, and then we start taking it away. And when there's laws, the inability or ineligibility to serve in the military again, yeah, there are real issues that need to be addressed, and if I don't have data, I don't want to, like, succumb to the panic, because it's like, I don't know how many people are watching right now, but I guarantee you that if one of us started screaming and said something outrageous, you could get that video clip to blow up on the internet. And people's perception might be that, well, this is what the show's about, or that we have a bigger audience than we do, or that we represent more people than we do, only because that blow up got attention. When you get away from the social media and just the conversations about it, and you talk about, as you are, what laws are actually being passed and what's being done to help people versus what's being done to hurt people, yeah, we are fucking up left and right and have a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed.
There's no question that there are still problems, that there are still mistakes. But I mean, even as we talk about, marriage equality being under attack and these different things, I mean, it was, I think, almost just under 100 years ago that a white man and a black woman couldn't get married in Virginia.
Yeah.
So the Loving case was a precedent cited in the Obergefell case that created or established marriage equality nationwide. So, yeah, when I see court clerks refusing to give out marriage license to gay couples in Alabama, it pisses me off, because that's a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be fixed. And not everything, of course, is about marriage, but I do think that that's an interesting milestone. And I do think that even as we see these problems, I'm just not convinced that they're getting worse. Maybe in the last 5 years, they're worse than the previous 5 years. I don't even know that that's true. But when you zoom out far enough and you start looking at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I'm just not convinced that the divide between the good states and the bad states, or the blue states and the red states, or the progressive versus the conservative, I'm just not convinced that divide is widening in a meaningful way. Perhaps it is, but I don't know that there is data to really reflect that.
I would say one point of optimism was the very thing that you brought up, which was getting, New York getting rid of the gay panic, trans panic stuff.
Yeah.
That is certainly something that I would say shows a trend in the right direction, even if we are still making horrific mistakes that are affecting people's lives and in some cases resulting in people's death along the way. You could look at the trend and say, hey, the trend is towards better, and then you could look at it at any particular scale and see this going on. And how you choose to look at it is going to determine whether or not you're optimistic. But nobody here is suggesting, oh, yeah, we're done. We're like post-homophobia. We're post-racism.
We wouldn't be here every week. I mean, Dr. Ray wouldn't be writing books and starting foundations. You and I wouldn't be doing shows like this. None of this would exist if these problems weren't still huge, giant problems that demand a response.
But I'm saying that, like, for instance, that law, that protection simply would not be passed in the red state, for instance, like Texas, or those other places, and will not unless, for instance, there is an electoral change, right? Some great electoral shift. And, for people who are there, who are in those states right now, I mean, like, it's more than likely that, like, such a shift won't even happen in their lifetime.
Oh, yeah. And it's one of the reasons why I'm largely opposed to states' rights and why I'm a big fan of the fact that we are in the United States. And so that if your state is full of bigots who don't want to give people their rights and don't want to pass marriage equality, we have a national level thing that'll supersede it so that we can basically force bigots to do the right thing. because there's all kinds of shit that would have never passed in Texas.
Oh yeah, no question.
Right. Yeah. Every time the religious powers are attacked or feel attacked, they become more fundamentalist. That's my thesis anyway. I wrote about that in my book, The God Virus. Every time a religion feels it's under attack, or if it is attacked, there are fundamentalists that come out in defense of that. We saw it in Islam when the Crusades went to the Middle East in the 1100 and 1200s. There was a radical fundamentalism arose out of that. Same things happened after 9/11, or as a part of 9/11. I don't want to get into too many details, but what I want to say is whenever Islam is being attacked, or whenever Christianity is attacked, or Hinduism is being attacked, we can easily see examples of where it becomes more vociferous. And that's what we're seeing in the South, because the most religious areas are going to increase their religiosity, and they're going to get out, and they're going to vote, and they're going to elect people who will then enact legislation. Saw the same thing after the 1954 desegregation ruling by the Supreme Court. It didn't stop the states from enacting all sorts of new laws that were unconstitutional.
And erecting all of these monuments to Confederate war heroes and all of these things. Yeah, there is that fundamentalism that comes as a response.
The South lost the Civil War.
Yeah,
and for the next 40 or 50 years, they did everything they could to to reimpose their rule, the white supremacist rule, over the entire South. I mean, so what we're seeing, I want to just answer directly to Stan. What we're seeing, Stan, in my estimation, is that we're seeing an increase in the fundamentalist response to their perceived attack. And it may be perceived or it may be real. I don't really care at this point in time. We're saying you're wrong and you can't take people's rights away from you. And they're saying, well, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to show you that we can do it anyway. It happens every time you see this kind of cycle. So it's up and down, up and down, up and down. I think what you two are saying is the general trend's still up, but there's some pretty big dips in that up and down.
No, the optimist in me looks at that as like the final death throes of the dragon before it keels over.
Yeah,
so it's going to be most violent right before it is about to succumb to its demise.
Sure. I mean, to steal Dr. Ray's analogy, I think of it as like a fever. You know, I mean, as the virus is starting to take over, or I guess in this instance, the free thought is starting to become more prevalent and the body is reacting.
Right.
And that's, painful. But it isn't necessarily a good sign for the body. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not being overtaken by the virus. A fever is usually a sign of unhealth or unwellness. So.
Right.
Well, to your point, Christy, that reminds me of something President Obama said, saying that, the fever is going to break. Like, we have to break the fever of the Republicans. Like, watching as this presidency went by, Republicans becoming more and more extreme, like, in their views and fighting and fighting against the Democratic Party. And, he made a famous quote saying that, we have to break this fever, right? But it's not. I mean, I think Donald Trump is the reaction saying that it's not. I think there's a trajectory that they're traveling along. I mean, I guess maybe it is also to Dr. Ray's point that they're finding new ways, right? To attack a liberal society, right? Mm-hmm. So before it was easy to attack blacks, right? They were the easy target, right? And then that became unacceptable. So then they moved on to gays, right? And then that became less acceptable. And now they're on to immigrants, which is a perennial, fear for them. Mm-hmm. And trans people, right? Trans people, there's been this huge uptick, right, in talking about them. And so, that's been a really big focus of their oppression, right?
Although,
go ahead.
So we have to stay nonpartisan. So rather than breaking it down along political lines, talking about it with respect to the issue, nothing unites people like convincing them that they have a common enemy.
Yeah.
And for people who feel like their way of life is fading and the world is going to hell in a handbasket, once you convince them, oh, no, here's our new common enemy. And this time it's the LGBTQ community, or this time it's immigrants, or this time it's, whoever. That's one way to kind of drum up support. The nice thing, and this is me, of course, being optimistic again. I have friends who like don't want these bigoted, racist, fascist jackasses to exercise their free speech at all. And I want them personally just comfortable enough so that we can identify who they are. Because otherwise you have a hidden problem. If you make it so that nobody will talk about it, now all of a sudden you still have, for example, racist people on police forces. It's just you don't know how to identify who they are as easily as when they're just happy enough. It's like when there's 1,000 people at a Pride festival and like a dozen, swastika-wearing bigots show up. Yeah, okay, it's definitely a bad thing, but now I know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know they're massively outnumbered.
Yeah. So I think it has to do with how you zoom, how closely you look at it, because there are problems, and then it does turn into a little bit of perspective. Yeah. How you interpret those problems, and whether you have a sense of hopefulness about your own picture of the future. And I get why it is why it's difficult to feel hopeful sometimes. I think that's very human when you're seeing other human beings having the rights stripped away. I don't know that there's really a way to answer the question, but I hope that we've kind of poked around the edges of it and at least given you some ideas of what we're looking at.
So get out and find a candidate you support and vote. That's the moral of the story. Those people who sat home and didn't vote, we're getting the results of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks so much for taking my call. I really appreciate your time. And this was helpful. Have a great night.
Hey, thank you so much.
Bye.
So yeah, I mean, these are big picture items. I wish that we had a concrete answer. I mean, I wish somebody would call up and say, hey, what's the name of this kink, or something that I could walk away from being like, oh, I know this one. But these are problems without easy solutions.
Right.
After the show's over, I'll list off some kinks that you can name for me.
Okay, cool.
So that I know the names.
You know what? If I don't know the name, I'm really good at making it up.
Oh, it's
and
cool.
Those are honestly more fun. So, maybe we should shoot some bonus content.
So I wanted to apologize real quick for the people who might have been distracted by the fact that I was checking my phone. There's somebody who's close to me who messaged me just as we were going live, who's going through a bunch of stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm getting ready to do a podcast, but I'll talk to you afterwards. But the curious thing is that a couple of the messages came in, and it was very clear that they're at least tangentially related to this, and I recommended the Psychotherapist Project, which is a brilliant segue to get you to talk for a minute about the Psychotherapist Project.
All right. Well, I love talking about the Psychotherapy Project. Well, first of all, I started it 7 years ago, but Dr. Caleb Black and Samantha Carlton now run it. I turned it over to them about 3 or 4 years ago. But it is a database of therapists that have been vetted by us. And by us, I mean by our team, to be evidence-based and secular. They're not going to send you back to church or tell you that your depression is related to being an atheist or any of that kind of bullshit that people get. And we're about that close to having 400 vetted therapists. We're at 396 today, I looked. And almost 16,000 clients have registered at seculartherapy.org and looked for a therapist. So what we're trying to do is help solve a problem. I mean, I started this 7 years ago because I saw a problem, and that is there's a hell of a lot of Christian counselors out there.
Yeah.
And they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They're really poorly trained. They don't know anything about human sexuality. It's terrible. What are you going to say?
Well, yeah, that's one problem. And then I've said it before on this show. As a therapist, with therapist friends, et cetera, the number of folks I know who have a master's degree of science and a deck of tarot cards is overwhelming. That Venn diagram is huge. I know so many therapists that are very wooey, that are very believing in these sort of like vague ideas of feeling. And, it is an imperfect science. It is a soft science, if you will.
It's mushy.
It's mushy. I get
By the
it.
way, I have a tarot deck or 20. I just don't think they're going to provide me any counsel or.
Yeah, and you know what? These tools, it's all about how you use them. When we, look at them in narrative terms, or these different things are fine and great and wonderful. But to your point, having a database of therapists that are evidence-based, that believe in the rule of science, that, not every human emotion, not every human experience can necessarily be measured and quantified, but we should be approaching these things with a scientific mindset.
Right. Well, we all are pretty understanding that you can teach other animals to behave in certain ways. You can teach dogs to behave properly. You can teach dogs. We also know you can traumatize dogs, and so that if you traumatize them, by serious mistreatment, then they'll behave in different ways. Well, religion does that to people, and what we know is that many therapists out there have no clue of the trauma that religion causes people, and our therapists are generally fairly well educated in this notion that beating a child because they didn't pray enough, or beating a child because they got caught masturbating, is traumatizing.
As is beating a child for anything.
Anything, yeah. Absolutely. So what we're getting on chats and calls, and people looking for a therapist, is I'm trying to become more of who I want to be sexually, and I can't because I keep getting these crazy ideas coming into my head that came from my childhood abuse. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's really a big part. It's not all of what we do, but it's a big part of what we do at Psychotherapy Project, helping people really understand who do you want to be sexually, not who your church wants you to be, or who your minister wants you to be, your Sunday school teacher, or your parents. Because every one of those entities I just named had an agenda for you, and the agenda was to keep you in bed with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And there's a secondary problem with this, which is one of the reasons why I love the Psychotherapy Project so much, is that not only are we encouraging people to find proper science-based medical and psychological support, some of them, as you're pointing out, are basically the same victims of indoctrination that they're trying to counsel. And some of them are victims of indoctrination in another sense, which they could have somebody come in and this person's just distraught over what religion's done to their life, and they could be like, oh, I'm not religious, but have you considered your spirituality and your spiritual walk? Right. And now you send somebody off in another direction where you're not even addressing the problem. And so getting people who are familiar with religious trauma syndrome, with PTSD, and with making sure that what we're doing is addressing the person and what they're going through, and not whatever baggage came from their religion or our religion or whatever, that's critical. And I can't count the number of people who I've talked to who are like, yeah, I was at my therapist, and then out of the blue they said this. But it also applies to the pseudoscience stuff. Well, the reason I got 20 tarot decks is because I'm a magician and I collect some pseudoscientific and oddity stuff.
Yeah.
But the ones that have bought into crystals and Reiki and reflexology and others, they network. And it's so like you could be at your therapist and think that this is an atheist secular therapist here, and we're having these good conversations. And then in the session, one of them might go, well, and I'm not advocating this, but have you talked to a reflexologist? Because I've heard, or an acupuncturist or whatever, I've heard there may be something along those lines. And it's in the spirit of this, what can it possibly hurt to try it? And I get that. By and large, if somebody tells me that they're more comfortable when they pray, even though they don't believe in God, I look at it as some loose meditation thing. Mm-hmm. But that can lead to the slippery slope of now I'm into countless woo things.
Right. Yeah, and when you're depressed, which is a common issue, when people first leave religion, the biggest diagnosis I see is depression. It's like the biggest diagnosis I see after a divorce is depression too.
Sure.
When people get depressed, I mean, you know all about this. Yeah. You've seen, when people get divorced, they go into a real funk, and it's hard to get out. When they leave religion, it's like getting divorced from your whole family, maybe. From your children, from your spouse. I mean,
whole community.
Whole community. You've just been dumped by a whole community.
And then there's, in a marriage, you typically tend to believe this is for life. And so you start to develop all of these thoughts about, we're going to retire together. We're going to do this together.
Well, there's your first mistake.
Well, so there's something to be said about mourning those future expectations.
Right.
And I think that religion does that in this very magical way, because you thought you were going to spend not just 100 years with God, but infinity.
You're
going to spend
soulmates.
eternity with God. And when you take that away, that's something to mourn.
It is. And we see actual specific differences by religion on how that grief and loss goes. For example, if you're a deeply Mormon, you're grieving a whole lot of stuff because you thought you're going to have your family on your own. If you're a man, you're going to get your own planet and you're going to have your whole family. Well, now your poor wife isn't going to get a planet because you've left. I mean, it really, the religion, Mormonism it's a brilliant, Mormonism is one of the most amazingly brilliant psychological con jobs ever outside of Scientology, probably, that's ever been propagated on this planet. But that's just one of the pieces that you see. Now I'm not just mourning the loss of my family, but my family's mourning my loss and the fact that they're not going to get their own planet, and all of my children are not going to be able to talk to you anymore. And I mean, just thing after thing after thing. Yeah. Well, so the reason I brought that all up was somebody who's not well trained in this stuff is not only going to not help you in your depression. They're going to make it worse. Yeah. And when people, especially spiritual bullshit kind of stuff, they are not addressing the root problems of the depression.
If my cause for this is that I've had my brain stuffed with ideas that I have a soulmate, that I need to have a certain sexuality, that these things are opposed to God, and I found my way out of it. So walking into a therapist's office to have them essentially reinforce the same ideas, even in a separate context.
Right.
Well, this isn't your religion. Some of them will go down the naturalistic fallacy route of, this is how I'm going to define what's perverse, is what you're doing is against nature. And that's not only a fallacy, but it's spawned from incredible ignorance because clearly they haven't seen enough of nature.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that there's anything that humans could possibly do that people would label as deviant that doesn't happen somewhere else in the
right, exactly, right. Yep. So anyway, glad you brought the Secular Therapy Project up.
You're welcome. And it's come in handy way too many times.
Good.
And on the, I think that religions do a lot of harm in ways that aren't as obvious because they're spun in a way that seems positive. So the very notion of a soulmate. Oh, that's love. And we all
there's
love
a lot
love.
of beautiful poetry to it.
There's somebody out there for you. Yeah. There's somebody out there for you and all this. And we do the same thing with regard to dealing with death. If we would just begin by being honest with people so that their entire life they understood that death is the unavoidable, inevitable conclusion of a life, that would allow them to prepare for that eventuality in a completely different way. Right. You're still going to grieve. You're still going to grieve a loss. I miss the people in my life who've died, but I don't have to worry about suffering, severe depression about it because I have a different perspective on it. But if I try to fix that, as I think many churches and religions have done, by saying, don't worry, you'll see them all again in an afterlife.
Right.
I'm doing a massive disservice to that person. They may never find out because they can go through the rest of their life going, well, at least I'll see the people I love in heaven. And of course, when they die, if that's the end, they'll never know that it was the end.
Sure.
So it tends to be viewed as like this almost harmless optimism of we get to do this. And I think the world would by and large be better if we gave people the skills to cope with the facts of reality. And then if there is an afterlife, it's a bonus. And if you do find somebody that you love for the rest of your life, cool.
Right.
But the reality is marriages end, friendships end, relationships end, people, depart organizations or whatever. Loss is part of it.
Those myths interrupt the grief and loss process.
Yeah.
I'm very sure of that. And so instead of taking a year to get over a death, it may never get over a death because of the myths that are put forth around the issue of dying.
And I think
or
part of it is that
yeah.
you spin these myths, And then you are constantly faced with the unavoidable facts of reality that those myths have to be absurd. Oh, well, we prayed for years and years that we would have a child, and a child was born, and 5 days after it was born, it died. None of that makes sense. And telling them that they're going to see their child again in an afterlife doesn't help, because that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. You did nothing to prepare people for reality.
Right. And relationships are the same way as death and dying. So we have this myth that love is forever. Well,
sure.
And I'm glad if it does. I have no problems with that. It's just so rare. It doesn't happen that often. So what people tell us, you and I in this field of mental health is, I have a failed marriage. And that just seems absurd to me.
Yeah, that phrase drives me crazy. I mean, I don't want to say, did you have a good time? I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but a marriage doesn't fail because it ends. Right. I mean, when you play a video game and your character dies, did you have fun playing the game?
That was a failed game.
When you beat the game, did you win? Yeah. Sure, you beat the game, but was that the point of the whole thing?
Right,
it really wasn't. And having a marriage that lasts until somebody dies, how is that the goal? Like, why is that?
Right.
So we could spend a whole other podcast
as
on
the guy who's going to be
honest,
evidently. As the guy who's evidently going to be signing some divorce papers, I don't know, sometime this weekend, I can say I still love my future ex-wife. We're still friends. We talked several times. Unfortunately, one of our cats had to be put down today, so she was messaging me. But we message each other every couple of days anyway. I don't bear her any ill will, and I'll never look at my marriage as if it was a failure. There were good things. There were bad things. I look at it like this was life, and we are now better off separate. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're not better friends and we're not closer friends. I mean, but there's no animosity, and and it was because we went into this knowing, hey, this notion of soulmates and forever is kind of BS. But we spent quite a bit of time saying, oh, we're never getting divorced. Matter of fact, there was a standing joke of, we're going to prove everybody wrong. So if things ever get to the point where we're going to get divorced, just shoot me and suffer the potential consequences. And yet we both knew throughout the whole thing that the facts of reality are that marriages end. Mm-hmm. And quite often, it's for the good of everybody involved, even if they're not necessarily aware of it. It's not true in every case. But I think if we started giving people, I think we've shielded people from reality. People complain about giving participation trophies and all this other stuff. That's all religion is one big fucking participation trophy. And the worst one, because the participation trophies that we give to youngsters to encourage them to participate actually have some positive effect and a real effect to encourage stuff, no matter how much you want to poo-poo them. But religion is the world's greatest and worst participation trophy.
Yeah, God loves you just because.
You are special chosen, no matter how terrible and
God's
shitty
chosen
you are.
People. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, there's still a lot to get to. I do want to talk to Diego very, very quickly. Diego, I'm going to let you know we've got just about 5 minutes here, so I hate to rush you, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. So what's on your mind tonight?
Oh, hi. This is Diego calling from Guadalajara. Glad to hear from you guys. Thanks a lot for the work you all do. I'm calling from Mexico. Mm-hmm. As you may know, we have a lot of Catholic influence permeating our society. And I'm gay, and I live with my boyfriend in a big city, and it's a little bit more liberal, even though there's still a church in every street. Mm-hmm. But I'm fine. I can deal with whatever little hate I get every once in a while. But so I have a friend that I met at work who is a trans woman, and well, she is having a very difficult time just living her life because she gets abused at home, and work is hard for her because she got attached to a specific person, and then that person left her, and she's having trouble getting over it. And I really want to help her out, but I really don't know how much can I do from here. It's just a very difficult situation for her, and she's talked about not wanting to live anymore. And I don't think that she would actually do anything dangerous to herself, but I don't know. I mean,
it's not worth being wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that you're going to know your friend far better than we are, and I'm definitely going to let Darrel address this, but I want to just mention I've had people who I was convinced would never actually commit suicide, that this was a cry for help, and I've been right, and I've also been wrong. And it's never worth being wrong. I'd rather lose a friendship in an attempt to make sure that someone is getting care than maintain a friendship only to have that person no longer be around at all.
Yeah, I mean, working with the National Suicide Prevention Line, we definitely remind each other that it's better to be mad and alive than dead and not upset. To that end, I would say I myself am not super familiar with the resources in Mexico. I can say I did recently learn that the Trevor Project does receive calls from Mexico, and whether they're able to help her directly, I know confidently that they'll have a better understanding of what sorts of resources are available specifically in your area. So I'll make sure to, once again, I mean, we should probably just have that bannered on everything that we do, but I'll make sure to link that once again in the footnotes of the show. The Trevor Project is a great resource that I would recommend.
Right.
Anything else come to mind for you?
No, that would be the first thing I would recommend, the Trevor Project, or the National Suicide Hotline. And I'm sure Mexico has it. If you have any trouble finding that, you can go to recoverfromreligion.org, hit the chat button, and ask one of our agents to help you find wherever you live. They will help you find the resources. Mm-hmm. That's one of the beautiful things about our resource pages and our connections. We got connections in a lot of countries throughout the world to find those kinds of
our international.
And in the interim, just keep being a good friend and let them know that you care about them, that you have concerns, that you're not trying to, take over their life or tell them how to live, but you want them to be a part of your life, right, and you want to help them as best they can. And that way, I don't know that it's possible to overemphasize that, because everybody will do I'm here for you, I'm here for you. And a lot of people will say that and aren't.
Sure.
And so you need to say that and then make it clear that that's actually the case.
And don't be afraid to ask them straight up, are you thinking of hurting yourself?
I think that's one of the most important takeaways. There's this very common thought that if you mention suicide, if you invite that specter into the room, that you'll somehow put the thought in their head. And the research just does not bear that out.
It shows the opposite.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's important to be explicit if you do feel like that's a concern, to not use euphemisms of, well, have you thought maybe, ask somebody directly, are you considering suicide? Are you considering self-harm? These different things.
Right. Okay. Good luck, Diego. I appreciate your kindness and
while
concern.
It's not my show, by all means, call back and let them know, how things are progressing, whether they improve, if somebody got help, because that's the sort of stuff that all of us, I'm presuming, care about here, because these are good people. I'm talking about these individuals next to me who aren't just here to talk for a minute and then, mm-hmm, go on and live your life. We have blessed you with our fountain of knowledge. That's a crock. We want to know that people are okay.
Well, and in particular, if there are any resources that turn out to be incredibly useful to her, or anything else that you might want to share with us, we would love to hear about that as well, so that we can continue to get the word out. So,
absolutely.
I really appreciate you calling. I hope that we kind of answered as well as we could. I don't know that we were able to offer as much as I think we would hope to, but I think those are some good places to start.
I really appreciate it. And just something very quick. She does happen to speak English. Is there? Does the Secular Therapy Project offer? I don't know, like some online support or resources that she may be able to reach. I mean, of course, I would presume that something on the air would be more effective. Or...
You can search, you can register, she can register, or you can register yourself as a client and search our database. And we have a number, I think we counted something like 40% of our therapists will do distance counseling. That literally getting on Skype and talking, or FaceTime, or some video counseling. So being outside the United States is not an impediment. You can get somebody, you can get help. Now, they do have to charge. I mean, they are professionals.
Sure.
But that would be the first thing I would recommend. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for your guys' time. I hope
You're welcome.
You can keep on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck, and please let us know if there's anything else that comes up. We're sex@atheist-community.org, and we'd love to hear from you.
I have a question for Darrel.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So this is just me putting forward my general ignorance. So Secular Therapist Project, almost exclusively English. Luckily, his friend speaks English, so obviously it's going to be available. But the money issue, of course, therapists need to be paid. Unfortunately, we're in a position where a lot of people who might need therapy the most aren't in a position where they can do that. And I'm thinking specifically, I have a number of trans friends who, because of the costs of transition and then the oppression that comes from what job you can have or can't have in a bigoted society, they're often in a position where they are the ones who may need this the most and are yet unable to do it. Does somebody know of an organization that has grants for therapy for any of this? And if not...
There are thousands of them, and they are all tiny and insufficient. You know, to be honest with you, a lot of that cost financially is being passed to the therapist. You know, and we don't have enough time tonight to unpack all of that, but mostly therapists are folks who got into this field because they want to help, and they, you know, work hard to get there, and they want to charge, and they want to make a decent wage, and it is at the point where basically I don't know any therapist who exclusively sees people that they charge their full price to. They're constantly expected to reduce their price based on people's needs. And, you know, I guess that's sort of a nice form of communism, sort of, but basically we're putting them in a position of having to negotiate what they charge based on how sad your story is in a lot of ways, which is a really broken system, I would say.
Sounds like an argument for universal health care that would cover therapy and make sure that therapists can make a living wage and people will have access to the shit they need so that they don't die.
Sounds like a good idea.
You said it. I didn't say it. I would love that.
I want to talk about one thing on Recover from Religion. It's an exciting thing that's happening right now, and that is we're doing a first of a kind that your listeners might be interested in. We have noticed we've got an online community that people can come and they can talk to each other based on what they're former, like if they were former Mormon or Baptist or any of those kind of things. If you come and chat and you say, I'm a former Baptist, I want to talk to other former Baptists, we can get you to a place that's private and safe to talk. But that's not the same as talking face-to-face to somebody.
Sure.
So we decided last year, about a year ago, we were going to put on something we're calling the Fall Excursion, Reconnect with Your Nature. That's the name of it, Fall Excursion, Reconnect with Your Nature. It's going to be held in North Carolina, the foothills of North Carolina, beautiful, beautiful retreat center there. And we're going to have, it'll be an opportunity for people to come together in a safe space, share experiences, talk to other people who are going through the same thing they've gone through, hear experts talk about different things. It's not a church, so you don't have to go to everything. You can sleep all day if you want. You can go hiking all day. We don't care. But it'll be an opportunity. We'll actually have 4 of our secular therapists there on site to help people if they just want to talk to a therapist.
Processing, and
I will be taking hikes around the place. We'll have an astronomer come and talk about stars and the universe and science. We'll be having meditation. One of our therapists will be teaching them 2 different meditation sections. So it'll be an opportunity to explore new ways of reconnecting with your nature. What we're trying to show is that religion disconnects you from your nature, connects you from... When you look at that beautiful sunset, you say, oh, God created a beautiful sunset. No, it's a rotation of the earth created that beautiful sunset with the dust that's in the air. I mean, it's not as romantic or it's not as religious for sure, but we're trying to help you. Okay, let's reconnect with our nature. And of course, one of the most important is our sexuality. Reconnect with your sexuality. So we're going to have 2 different sections just talking about how do we deal with the programming that we got from our religion about our sexuality.
So anyway, what are the dates for this, and how do people register? Because I think I want to go.
Okay, September 2021, I believe was I should have looked at my calendar, but it's that weekend.
Well, and there are links to all of this information in the show notes. So
you can go to recoveringfromreligion.org and see up at the top it says excursion. Just hit the excursion button, and all the details are right there, and you can book a room or book whatever you want. There's a set of choices around what accommodations you get. We tried to really keep it low. We're actually got some fundraisers to help subsidize some people who want to come, who probably can't afford as much. So, hope they get out there and look at it and consider.
The class selection looked really, really excellent. Everything on the website was really exciting to see.
Good. Well, the director of the excursion is Shannon Nebo. She's putting a lot of effort into it.
No question.
And she and our executive director, Gail Jordan, have just spent literally a year putting this all together. And the rest of us
2 of my favorite people, I think I have to go.
Well, bring your magic tricks when you come. I'm sure they'd like to see those too.
Sing for a supper.
Yeah, sing for a supper.
Well, it sounds like a great program, and Recovery from Religion. I mean, we didn't get to half of the things I wanted to ask you about it, but I know it's an amazing organization. Again, that's recoveryfromreligion.org.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Great. Yeah, so we would definitely encourage people to check that out. I want to thank everybody for watching tonight and for joining us, especially to you gentlemen for coming in and having this conversation with us. And with that note, Darrel, did you want to take us out?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you want to volunteer for us, go hit the volunteer button and find out what that means. But I want you all to go out and give yourself a good orgasm or give somebody else a good orgasm.